But thank you all for coming out for the 5th week of the Grid Unlocked series on transportation and mobility in Sarasota and the greater Sarasota area. For those of you who I don't know, and we're seeing new people every week, which is good. My name is Kevin Cooper. I'm with the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce, and we are happy to host this series of events. And to kick off tonight, I just want to give a brief recap of kind of where we've been. This being the 5th week in the series, the first 3 weeks were really about foundational elements of transportation and mobility. So we talked a lot about definitions, language, how things are calculated, how traffic works, how humans interact with the transit network, what does that look like, and how does it feel. So it was really more of a, how do we as a community get a collective vocabulary and collective understanding and unified lens around what we're talking about. So we brought in some folks just to give us the groundwork of here's what transportation is, here's how you calculate traffic studies, here's how it all works. And that was the first 3 weeks. And you can find all of these slide decks that were presented and also videos from those presentations at a link that's up here. It's a SlideShare link. And we'll also be able, because you're here tonight, if you provided your email address, we will follow up and give you that link right there. So you can go back and review the slide decks and see the videos from the previous weeks. But that was the first 3 weeks. And then the last week that we did was the first week of, okay, so what do we do with that information? Now that we kind of have this collective understanding of the nature of traffic and the nature of the interaction with the roadway system, what do we do with that? And we had Andrew Georgiadis in, who's an urban planner, and he discussed the main point, I think the main focal point was about healing the grid. So you have roadway networks, and how do you exponentially increase the opportunities for people to choose different routes to travel on? What do you do with that? And it was a fairly interesting topic of discussion, but again, you can go back, the videos are posted, the slide deck is posted, I won't beat it to death. But it was the first week for us to go, okay, what do we do with this thing? And that leads us into this week. We're going to continue to talk about what do we do with this thing. And that will lead into the final week of talking about what we do with it. And I think it's really important for us as a community to have that conversation. And we're very thankful as a chamber to have a number of partners assisting in hosting this event, the least of which being Gulf Coast Community Foundation, who's partnered with us to help present this event. They do a really interesting regional scan on a semi-regular basis. And they did a recent one that they released, and not surprisingly, transportation mobility was a real big focus of how do we move this community forward. There's certain things that we can do around here, but if we don't address certain things, it will be all for naught. And transportation is a big part of it. And I've mentioned in my introductions in previous weeks this is a half a century old conversation in Sarasota. Traffic. What do we do about it? There's too much of it. It's seasonal. What have you 5 years ago it wasn't like this. It takes me forever to, so this is not new. But hopefully trying to bring it together and have a conversation in terms of defining it and having a good handle around it's a little bit new. So we also have some great media partners through SRQ Media who help push this out for us. A hyper-local focused publication, Tableside Restaurant Group, proprietors of not only the Francis, but a number of fantastic local restaurants. Eric Collins helping us video these and get them on. So we're really thankful to have a number of great community partners along the ride for this, and we hope that you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to your feedback. If you have any questions or any feedback about anything we've done here, or you go back and review what we have done, communications@sarasotachamber.com is an email address you can feel free to reach out to, because as we approach the end, we'll be compiling kind of the information and data we've gathered here into something that's shareable as we have the slide decks and the videos. So to introduce tonight's speaker, I want to bring up really one of the guys who's really been the lead person that's devoting a lot of time, energy, and support of bringing these speakers together, really from around the local area and around the state to do this, and another great partner in this, a partner from Hoyt Architects, Chris Gallagher. So, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Let me just make a couple of points here as we continue on with our last speaker that's going to present new information tonight. We began this series with the idea of elevating the conversation. I think one of the other things I like to say is that we've had Rick will now be our 5th speaker here. Neither the Gulf Coast Community Foundation nor the Chamber officially endorses everything every one of these people has said, and probably everyone in the audience doesn't agree with single thing that every one of these speakers says. That just comes with the territory. Where we're going with this, where we would like to end up at week 6, is some compilation of the ideas that have been presented that the Chamber, the Gulf Coast Community Foundation, the City of Sarasota, Sarasota County, could go back and amongst themselves look at the things that have been presented and make up their own minds about which of those things are really good ideas, which of those things are fundable, doable, which of those things could we get accomplished quickly, which are expensive, which are inexpensive, we can do tomorrow. So it's really been about generating ideas, and again, anyone in the room might have a particular point of view about whether that idea is great or not. And we're walking into a world that Rick is going to talk about tonight there's a lot of unpredictability about what's going to happen with transportation in the future. So again, for any of us making those decisions, these are not going to be black and white decisions. It is and again, I think you'll find some of what Rick is going to present tonight thought-provoking in terms of what are the changes in technology going to mean for us. Rick, I asked Rick to come here tonight. Rick actually had a long background at FDOT, but he's really the first speaker amongst the group that is really working not only in the state of Florida, but all around the country, in fact, around the world. He was in Panama City, Panama last week, working on a transportation and redesign project there for the city of Panama. So he's got a long career here. I have personally worked with Rick on 2 projects here in Sarasota. There was a charrette down in Osprey several years ago, and also the Fruitville Initiative out on Fruitville Road. And what my takeaway from Rick, and one of the reasons we sought him out to come and speak to us, is Rick is again, transportation guy, but really gets what it means to make a great community. How do you create better streets and better places to live, and how do you shape those things first, and then how do you get transportation systems that work in conjunction with creating those great streets? So with no further ado, Mr. Rick Hall. Rick? Which one?
The recessed lights.
Who's our light guy here? In that the light right in front of the
Well, great to be here with you. This is one of my favorite cities in Florida. Just walking here from Chris's office was a joy. And, we don't often see so many 1,000 feet of great walkability. The trees, the sidewalk cafe opportunities, it's just a great place. And it's that way because of diligent work that people did for many, many years. So let's get started. The content of the presentation, four different points, a little bit of background to, if you don't know it already, to further elucidate what the problem is. Why are we even here? What's going on? And then there's a mobility revolution going on. And then there's a context policy shift that needs to happen. And then I'll have a few recommendations for you. This is a basic slide. I hope I don't embarrass you with the simplicity of this, but when we say walkability, we really mean 4 or 5 modes being active, not just one. So when you have great walkability, you've got the walkers, cyclists, transit users, and all in there together. And they're often called the forgotten modes, because in too many years in the last century, we forgot about how people really wanted to walk, ride their bicycles from A to B. Bicycles were for children, and walking was for poor people. So there was just no emphasis on it at all. But it just so happens that we're now realizing that it's the healthiest and most efficient mode of transportation you can undertake. I mean, how many doctors' regimens for health and fitness say, 30 minutes a day, you got to be out there, you got to be walking. And it's, we in this country have to take extra time to do our walking because there's no logical daily use of walking to get us around. They studied They studied the Italian diets, you know, because they had much less illness, and studied and studied and studied. And finally, they realized it's not so much that the excuse me, not so much that they had healthier food or anything. It's just that they walked to buy the salami. They walked to buy the wine. So get clever with the phone, and this is what happens to you. Walking is the healthy and efficient mode. But it also includes motorists in that walkability pattern. We're not all that crazy about closing streets off and having walking only. That's not as healthy, because many businesses need some of the drive-to customers, and if you're there walking and it's one of the off hours, 10 o'clock at night, you'd rather have a few people driving along your path as you walk from A to B. Here's a book that, if you're interested in this stuff, interested in this major shift, this major change that's happening between auto-dominant planning and construction and having all modes available, then Peter Norton's book, Fighting Traffic, is a must for you. He's a historian. He doesn't have an axe to grind. He's not a traffic engineer. He's not an urban design architect. He's just a historian. He's holding up a mirror reflecting what history is showing us. He studied between 1900 and 1940 in detail what happened, because he realized through cataloging some photographs for a very prominent photographer in North Carolina that had passed away. He got the job to catalog, and during the later parts of this guy's career, the pedestrians all disappeared. And he said, why did that happen? So he gets down to naming names and putting newspaper articles, and sometimes he goes month to month between 1900 and 1940 to tell us what went wrong. Because if you don't understand how you moved from no driving of automobiles to no walking at all, then how are you going to get back to some walking? He found the pivot point was 1924, because the manufacturers of automobiles had a bad sales year in 1923. So in 1924, they said, we're out of here. We're not going to sit around at tables talking to aggrieved parents and police chiefs and department store owners. So they all left the scene. No more participation by them. They put all of their money in the federal government to influence the fact that city streets needed to be wider so the cars could have a faster trip through town. Not a good idea. So from that 1900 scene, this is obviously a critical influx of workers from Europe and other countries in New York, and they occupied all these old buildings as tenements. This is the other extreme. This is a lot of walking on the street, and this is no walking on the street. I don't know exactly where this is. It may be. It was maybe born in someone's computer. I'm not sure. Here's another very important book, The Option of Urbanism. Chris Lineberger is a trained real estate professional. And he wrote this book, and he determined that we have two kinds of places in America: drivable suburban and walkable urban. And what I experienced coming here tonight is the walkable urban part. And what I experienced this morning driving in from the interstate was the drivable suburban part. And the floor area ratio is a kind of a density measure of buildings. In the suburbs, you get 0.2 to 0.4 floor area ratio. That means you have a lot of open space around you. And then walkable urban, 0.8 up to 40. That's how many floors you have compared to the size of the lot. So I give the walkable urban the 5 walking man symbol, and 2 for the suburban parts. This is a a beautiful street that was developed only about 8 or 10 years ago. And it looks like it's been there 120 years. But it just had a classical frontage. And every time we line the streets up with the building face, the sidewalk, the street trees, parked cars, then the pedestrians show up in droves. I mean, unless you have some economic problem for your whole city, you do it this way, the pedestrians will come. To the point where it's not even useful to do travel modeling to try to predict how many people are going to walk from A to B. It's a situation where you just have to provide the right environment, and they come right in. My first job was with Florida DOT, and for 10 years, I ran the Miami study for about 3 years, and then I was transferred over to the Tampa Bay. So I ran all the MPO studies in this whole region and had the distinct pleasure of starting up the one for Sarasota. And we called it SMATS, the Sarasota Manatee Area Transportation Study. We got it started, but I don't do that stuff anymore. And I'll tell you more about that in a moment. So there's a 5-star walkability. Here's a 2-man walkability. I don't even know where this is, but it could be anywhere. You see the buildings are way far away from the street, no parallel parking. The sidewalks are right behind the curb. One of the worst places to put a sidewalk on your street system. The trees should be between the sidewalk and the street. And what is that hanging in the middle of the air there? Anybody? What are those called? Traffic signal, yes. Never, if you're trying to get someone's mind to adjusted, and you walk into their office and you say, we have a problem with this traffic light, or we have a problem with this stop light, then in their mind, okay, amateur here in front of me. If you come in and say traffic signal, that's the language they use. Just a little hint for you in interfacing with these folks. There's another beautiful Sarasota street. That's a 5. See, and I could repeat this on all night long. The buildings are there, the sidewalks are there, the trees are there, the parallel parking is there, and it's a slower street than you otherwise would have. There's the main commercial street in Seaside, Florida, and of course it gets 5 walking symbols. Seaside was developed by the guy in the middle in the straw hat, Robert Davis. And that's where I stumbled into new urbanism. I was doing a lot of DRIs, developments of regional impact. And I would do the traffic chapter like you heard about several weeks ago, the calculation of the traffic and the forecasting. And I got to Seaside and I rolled their plans out. I'll never forget this. They had 12 intersections to an arterial street within a half a mile. And I was about to go tell Robert Davis and Andre Stawani, guys, we're going to have to change this. This is not the way we do things. But I held off until I heard them say they're trying to build the first walkable town from scratch since before 1930, and this was 1984. So that's where I had my epiphany about walking, is working on that project with those very talented folks. And here's how Seaside turned out. And even if you're on the very back, if you rent a cottage on the very back area, back here, even your 10-year-old child, even your 8-year-old child sometimes could make their way and walk all the way down and get to the beach from the very back cottage. And so walking is the prime assumption for Seaside's development. The commercial is in the center, and there's a chapel, and this is a school over on this side. So very well laid out with the pedestrian in mind. Now this friend Tom Lowe did this diagram, and then he did this hypothetical diagram. Thank goodness it's hypothetical. This is what Seaside would have been without Robert Davis. Okay, first thing you do is put all of your condos and line them up against the view of the water, right? I'm afraid you have a little bit of this going on, okay? But that's the number one wrong thing to do for Seaside. And then you have the strip center where this one looks like the one that you would get nails done and buy pizza, maybe, I don't know. And then the apartments are all done in what we call train wreck style. You see, it looks like, they have the big train wreck. They do that so nobody looks out their window into the, oh my God, the window of the apartment across the street. My God, we can't have that. So they're arranged with view sheds that do not look into somebody else's window. A very, very short-sighted, pun intended, short-sighted approach to that. And then you have the enclaves, and you've seen the real estate signs. Homes from the low 40s, right? Homes from the low 60s, and then homes from the low 80s, because they're all homogeneous. And it's this penchant that we have in America for living next to somebody with almost exactly the same income as us. It's kind of a perverted thing that's evolved. And now, just imagine now, here Susie and Joey get a chance to go with their parents, and they are they're in one of these I lost my pen here. Anyway, they're in perhaps that unit. Look what they have to do to go to the beach. They have to come out here, go out this way, come all the way around, and then find the only beach access. And so that's what's happening in every suburban development in the United States. That separation and for a myriad of reasons is causing tremendous extra travel. Now, another key thing for walkability is motor vehicle speed. You may have seen this before. If you are unfortunate enough to be hit by a motor vehicle traveling 20 miles an hour, then you would have only a 5% chance of not surviving. So 95% survivability at 20. And then when it goes to 30, it goes to over 50%, and 40, you have no chance, almost no chance of survival. And this is just high school physics. Force equals mass times acceleration. But speed is so vital to controlling that. And I'll speak a little bit about the downtown Sarasota plan, which I had the benefit of being a part of 12, 15 years ago, Frank. It's been so long I can't remember when it was. But that was a transformative study, I think, for your downtown. And many things were changed from the engineering side for streets, and that was generally a great success. The new roundabouts that are being considered were first mentioned in that study for the first time. Now, these are a little hard to see, but there is a program off Google Earth, and you go to Google Maps, and if you have an earlier version, not the latest one, but you can go down to traffic and you can see current traffic. But you can also click a little triangle on my older version and see typical traffic. So what I've done is this little box shows typical traffic, and it's set on Wednesday, and this happens to be Wednesday at 6:55 a.m. And the red lines indicate which streets are running more slowly than others. If it's all green, then you have a free-flowing network. And you'll begin to see orange and other colors come in. So that's 6:55. And here's 8 o'clock. So the difference, look at Fruitville Road. Okay, by 8 o'clock, Fruitville Road is slowing. And then by 11:45, lunchtime, everybody wants to come down to your fine restaurants in the middle of town and have lunch. And many people are driving there because they can't, work close enough just to walk to your downtown. Then that's near noon. And then this is a 1 o'clock, so it's really about the same. But when you get to 3, you start picking up some traffic out on the east side of town. And then finally at 5:20, that's about the heaviest traffic you have during the day. But notice that the traffic spreads itself out across your grid. That's the way people behave. People behave in cars totally unlike water behaves in a flow across a landscape. Water must obey gravity. Drivers don't obey anyone. Okay? They have their own minds. They're going to turn off of a congested street and drive on some of the side streets. Now, you remember I said that the buildings need to come in to the back of the sidewalk. And I caught this in Washington, D.C. Some suburbanites were attempting to move the buildings back away from the sidewalk because they were just so uncomfortable about that. You know, let's plant some trees out here, you know. Okay, so next let's go into this mobility revolution idea. And this guy, Lucas Neckermann, he's a German, obviously. And he's written 2 or 3 books now. But his first one was Mobility Revolution. And he states that he's interviewed all these people. He said Daimler calls it CASE, Connected, Autonomous, Shared, and Electric. BMW just rearranges it, Autonomous, Connected, Electric, and Shared. And Ford CEO calls it Mobility Revolution, after reading Lucas's book, I assume. And so there are a lot of people that he's interviewed in the automotive industry today that see this thing coming, this revolution coming. And Lucas, he just calls it the 3 zeros. The 3 zeros, meaning 0 emissions, 0 accidents, and 0 ownership. Now let's talk about this. This is getting serious. And of course, he's very confident about these predictions. He said it's blatantly obvious that we're headed into this thing. And he said the default assumption of you needing a car to get around is just, it's history. He said it's history. And he emphasizes that the company car, the fleet managers for organizations, whether it's trucks or cars or buses, they're one of the first ones that are going to see the benefits of having these autonomous driverless vehicles for their companies to use. Just imagine you go to the boardroom month after month and they ask you what your costs are there, Frank. And they say, well, okay, you're still looking good, you're holding steady. But if Frank can come in and say, you know, I got a 45% drop in my costs because all the drivers are not there any longer. And then that's a big deal. And that corporate board is going to say, Frank, give me more of this. So you're going to see the autonomous vehicles take over early in trucking and van supplies and deliveries. Maybe, well, you couldn't do FedEx because you got to deliver the package. But many of the activities that have drivers now are going to be without drivers. For the long-haul trucking business, that's not such bad news because they're having trouble hiring truckers these days. The younger people that are fit and able to drive trucks don't want to. It was the old cowboys, you know, back in the 50s and 60s. Oh yeah, I can get a truck. And they thought that was pretty cool. It's not cool anymore. So they're getting a drop-off in people that want to drive trucks. And that's just fine with the autonomous vehicles because they don't need truck drivers. And he's talking about ride-hailing and car sharing. And this begins to speak to the Uber and Lyft, but the subsequent activity where you get a vehicle there with no driver after you dial it up. He says there's an app. And it's mobility as a second, mobility as a service, MAAS. And he said, you're going to get this app, and you're going to say, I want to go from A to B. And it arranges the different modes of transportation you'll be in, what those costs are, and gets reservations for you and gets it all set up. So this is an evolution. This change is an evolution, and that brought me back to thoughts of these images that you've always seen, you know, and I was thinking about, no, that's not the one I wanted. That's The Evolution of Women by one author, and then, no, that's not what I want either. No, that's not right. Here it is. This is what I'm after. The Evolution of Man. And so the ability to get around and have that personal power extended for you by burning gasoline was a tremendous change. And of course, the Model T came rolling out of Detroit and began to change this entire nation. Then another tier of vehicles came along, good old 65 Mustang, and then first they were economical, and then they were really cool, and then they were big as your living room, you know. Let's take everything we possibly want down the road, you know, with the whole family. So, but now those are two different eras, and the third era that's upon us now is the Tesla Model 3. That's that people paid $1,000 for an opportunity to buy one of these a year and a half later. They're so cool. They are just that cool. 0 to 60 in about 4.5 seconds. Really high performance. Electric cars don't need to be like golf carts, like the first iteration. This is a Mercedes concept car that is so sleek. Notice the doors open to the back for the back door and to the front for the front door. So they open like an old Lincoln Continental. Beautiful machines that are coming out, and some that are not so beautiful, but extremely practical. And there will be different places that these different vehicles will be effective. One of the most effective places I know, and we've been doing some blue sky thinking about this, is the interstate. And the interstate system has nothing but one-way streets, no traffic signals, no stop signs until you get off. So that's the simplest network we have. So it's a beautiful application for vehicles that have no drivers. And I had to put this in. That's my first car. I love my old Bug, you know, sunroof and everything. But this is what's happening now. The road to full automation. I'll let you read some of the stuff there on the top. These self-driving vehicles are going to enter the market on 6 different levels of driver assistance. 0 is no automation. Driver assistance 1, the vehicle is controlled by the driver, but the automated part is either through acceleration and braking in that one dimension, or going right or left for turning. One or the other. So it's just a single element. I have that with a Volvo car, and I've been tinkering with that to see how the automation feels with me doing nothing in a straight line of traffic. It's been really good, except for when I'm hurtling toward a 2 or 3 cars stopped at a traffic signal, and it's going 45 miles an hour, and it doesn't look like it's going to stop. So I just can't bear it. I got to jump in. But then it goes 2, 3, 4. 4 and 5 are 4. It's completely automated, but the driver still needs to be attentive. And 5 is completely, and the driver can read a book or watch a video. So 5 levels. So watch for those 5 levels as they're going along. And of course, when you get these autonomous vehicles running around, then somebody's got to take responsibility for these things. And, you know, there could be some enforcement issues, right? That's a joke. Okay, 0 emissions. I love that idea. My next car is going to be electric. No question about that. When I sit in my own driveway and my wife is taking a little longer to get out of the house, it happens kind of often, really, and the breeze is blowing from the back of the car, and I happen to have my window down and my car is running, I can't stand the smell of my own emission. I can't stand it. It drives me crazy. So I'm doing that to the rest of the world? So electricity is coming in. Zero accidents or crashes. Over 90% of the fatalities are from human error, which includes alcohol and drugs and drowsiness and texting. 30,000 deaths a year. If we had 30,000 people dying every year in airplane crashes, I mean, they'd be all over the newspaper. Why is it not for automobile crashes? Another serious numbness that we have left over from the last century. Now, he says zero ownership. I say, well, mostly. This is the one that I'm not convinced of yet. He is saying that when they get to be no drivers and they're all automatic and they're very safe, then people will just use their phone apps and call up that autonomous vehicle. It'll show up, you'll ride off, go to your destination, and it will leave you there. And that sounds really, really great on kind of the first cut. But I'm not so sure I want to get into a car that a couple of people were in before, and they were not the cleanliest people that you want to be with. So keep them clean. That's my next phrase down there. You've got to make sure those cars are ready. When you get a rental car, it goes through a rigorous cleaning and inspection before you get it to use the next time around. They're going to have to work that in with these autonomous vehicles. Sharing is the key to reducing congestion. Part of this entire series has been, how do we reduce the congestion? Well, if you have these vehicles that have no driver, then there could be three guys, old friends, they're 87 years old and 92 years old, and they can't drive anymore, but along comes the autonomous vehicle to take them all down and get their haircuts at 5 o'clock. Okay, they don't have to worry about time of day. They don't have to beg for rides. They're additional drivers out there in any time of day. There are young people that want to go to the mall, perhaps, if they're still doing that. They can just jump in one of these things and head wherever they want to. So for the people that can't drive, having no longer to ask permission from a capable midlife person that is physically a driver, the vehicle miles of travel are going to go up. Unless there is a lot of that sharing where if it takes the Jill, John, and Susie to the mall, and then it leaves there and it gets Thomas from his office and takes him home. And you get three people going to the mall, and then Thomas, they may pick up Jane halfway home from his office, and it's another shared ride. So unless you can bundle the travel demands together in shared fashion, then there will be more congestion on the roads and not less. And then, what about that Shelby Cobra Mustang with 500 horsepower? The only thing electronic in that car is the switch that turns on and off the AM radio. That's as sophisticated as that car gets. But boy, is it powerful. And the driver of that car just doesn't want to give it up, He inherited it from his father, And soon enough, the driver of that Shelby Mustang is going to determine, if I pull out in front of these three cars coming up, they're going to brake. They're going to stop. This is cool. This is just what I wanted. I've always dreamed of this. So he's able to just do whatever he wants to do, or she, on the roadway system. So there comes your enforcement again. How are you going to single out these people, these rogue Mustang drivers? So there are some serious questions that have to be answered. There are many positives about it, but we certainly have not gone through all of those potential things that'll stand in the way. One very interesting thing: there is a Formula E racing circuit, nothing but electric cars. Every one of these race cars, very exotic, just like the Indy cars, but they're all electric, and they move around the world and have events promoting the electric car. Okay, context policy. This is vital to everything you've heard in any of these other lectures you've been to on traffic calculations, on traffic impact studies. All of those, and even transit, all of those are based on last century norms. Last century norms where the cars were primary and walking and biking were all forgotten. But Florida DOT has taken the very positive, proactive step in saying we're going to have a Complete Streets Initiative. CSI is the name of it. CSI, Complete Streets Initiative. And they're going to say, depending on where you are along that range of densities and intensities, you will design the street differently from one place to the other to the other. You don't design the same suburban arterial that you design out by the interstate on Fruitville. You don't bring that into the downtown of Sarasota because the downtown of Sarasota is not suburban. And the ideas came from the original biology. The biologists would go out into the field and they would have different sectors and they would record animals and plants that they saw in each one of those different sectors. So the idea was, why not do this for the human beings? Let's have a review of the characteristics of different places along this transect. So these are farm houses. This is a suburb, and then all the way down to the downtown core. So you can't know how to design a street unless you know where you are. And if you don't subscribe to this kind of differentiation of how you design streets, then you're going to design them all the same. I go to county's engineers' offices and I say, show me the street sections that are approved by your organization. And they open the book and there are 2 or 3. And there's just a lane width difference between being in the country and being in the suburbs. But we finish a plan for a new town that's going up. We have 12 to 14 different street cross sections that are finely detailed with parking or no parking or trees or no trees, commercial or not. And based on the based on the context of what we see. So context should guide street design. They had this draft of a document. They worked with it through June, and it explains the relationship between the context definitions and the streets. These are the context classifications they came up with: natural, rural town, suburban, urban general, urban center, and urban core. The last 3 are highly walkable, as you can tell by the diagram at the bottom. Here's one that's in the appendix as an example, and this is a suburban place, Lakewood Ranch in Manatee County. And what they do is look at an aerial, and they look at a figure ground, they look at photographs, and then zoning maps. And with all that analysis, they decide which context classification is appropriate for this section of state highway. So they're going to take every foot of state highway in the entire state of Florida and give it a context classification. This is wonderful news for the architects that are trying to design quality urban places that are walkable. This is another one. This is in Orange Avenue in downtown Orlando, and they go through the same analysis. Now you see, this is what I've been talking about. The buildings to the back of the sidewalk, street trees, some parking over there, and that's an urban walkable place. And so it gets a C6 designation. So once those are all designated, then you're on the right track to getting the streets designed correctly. So you've got to do a lot of mapping, urban versus suburban. This is a simple example. If you've got rural, you design the arterial, and before this came along, you just had kind of urbanized. Everything else was thrown into one bucket, so suburban and urban all got thrown in together. But then, if you have rural and suburban and compact urban, like your downtown, then you can design for 3 different speeds and parking arrangements and widths and trees and so on. And then you have a chance to get a brand new compact urban. It doesn't just have to be an old downtown like Sarasota's. With a finer degree of gradation for the types, arterials, collectors, and locals are going to be different from each other in rural, closer to each other in suburban, and almost identical to each other in compact urban. There's a book that Institute of Transportation Engineers started, Designing Walkable Urban Thoroughfares, and I participated on the committee that helped get this one out. So that's an official document. See, when you go in and you say to an engineer in an agency that, you know, we need some 10-foot lanes on this thing, we need to park cars on the edge, what they do is, they send you an email, and excuse me, you send the agency guy the email. He goes right over to his book, off his bookshelf, and checks it out, comes back to the phone and says, no, I'm sorry, we can't do that, because the book doesn't say you can do that. So we're getting more and more books that say you can do that. You can design in an urban walkable way. So I have some recommendations. What can the government do? The government can map that context and develop form-based codes. I understand you have one going, an effort for some form-based code activity. But it's coding and street design based on the form of the city, not just arbitrary measures. And I looked over Andrew Georgiadis's full slideshow, and everything he said, I say ditto. He's a very experienced, he's been to a lot of these urban design charrettes, so he really knows his business. So anything he says, I'll back him up. And then the government can also be an advocate for complete streets. That DOT is going out on a limb. They're doing things that they've never done before. This is not your father's DOT anymore. And so it's time to join with them and get the walkability started. And businesses can prepare by watching the change, watch the research that's going on and see what's happening. And it could be that your business needs to make a 90-degree turn in the other direction based on some research that's come out of some other place, and some other part of the world even. And project developers can build according to context and really stay current on these changes, because it's happening very, very rapidly. What can you do? What can you do as an individual citizen? It seems almost helpless sometimes. You just read all that you can, get these several books that I recommended, because there's so much out there in books and the internet. And then support the mobility concepts politically. Get with elected officials. They listen when enough people show up to make a change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick.
Okay.
We have time again for a few questions. So, anyone like anything from Mr. Hall? Yes, in the back.
Because that is the most natural speedway response.
Yes.
You know, I mean, there's nothing wrong with a little curve in a road every once in a while. And I understand the grid, but is it possible to make it a little more scenic while we're at it?
Good question. Why do we have straight lines for our context zones and our drawings and our diagrams? It's just an educational event. It's an educational procedure. where if you're going to show differentiation from one type to another, we always read left to right. And so we just all lay them out that way. When we have a lot more time, we take time to say that you've got to look at this from the air and say, what is the overall street network looking like from the top-down view? So we don't really go out and design things in these kind of straight lines. This is simply for the educational process of saying these are different from each other.
But if they're going to refer to that book, and that book has straight lines in it, what do you think they're going to require?
There are other diagrams that I did not show you in the book. And you can go to Florida DOT and just check out context, Complete Streets Initiative, CSI. And you can download this same document. Yes, sir.
My teenage daughter is getting ready to start driving real soon. And regarding the coming revolution, she'll be driving, but I can see a few years from now, that'll all stop when the new revolution comes. And I can imagine that her children won't drive at all, and they won't own a car. And that if that becomes fully 100% like they're talking about, it's going to have an impact on our country, like back in the horse and buggy days. It's pretty much. But can you imagine, though, that the entire country will lose half of our economy will go away, totally, because you won't be buying cars, you won't be buying gas, you won't be buying insurance, half of the economy will completely disappear. And that'll be difficult for some people to get through all that.
Visualize, okay, this is the change that's coming to the economy based on this revolution. It is huge, very, very significant. And that's why this Lucas Neckerman is almost beside himself going around to these conference to conference, and he goes preaching the word, you know. And what he says about that is that think of the previous revolution from horse-drawn vehicles, horse and buggy, to the auto. The saddle makers really took it in the ear, okay? And the bridles and the horseshoes. Oh God, nobody's buying any horseshoes. What am I going to do? Well, he just went into a machine shop and he did clutch plates, you know, for the cars. So it's not that it will all disappear, but it will morph into something pretty dramatically different. It's amazing. If you go to Google or any search that you can just speak to, you say, what are the 10 most wealthy companies in the world? What are the 10 most? And 7 or so of those are based on the current oil production, automobile production, and all those kind of businesses. Amazon is big, of course, and so is Walmart. But Walmart is up there because you are driving the last 5 miles of delivery to pick it up at a warehouse where it used to be taken to you in your house. So yes, it's frightening, but it's also very hopeful because it will morph into new things and new jobs, new opportunities. Yes, sir.
Most of our new electricity comes from natural gas in America. It's not going to be the end of those oil companies when we shift to electric cars, because they're just going to sell a lot more natural gas for a lot less oil. And they all own both, so it's not the end of the top 10. But back in 1924, people did not get up and walk to work one day and say, holy cow, the auto companies are lobbying the federal government to widen the streets and the sidewalks are getting narrow, or guess I better go out and buy a car. They went out and bought cars because cars were so freaking awesome. And everybody, the second they could afford one, even if it meant literally by the hundreds, by the millions, putting off buying a house, which used to be the gold standard for improving your life, to get a car instead. That's what drove that. And that remains true. There's not a metropolitan area in the United States in the last 20 years that has significantly increased the share of trips done by walking. Not one. In spite of all of this. So cars are still it, which makes me wonder, and what I want you to comment on is, I think we do want this more walkable here's the part of the city where people walk and don't consume the rest of the city, and everybody else consumes the rest of the city and doesn't consume the part where the people walk. We have a complete divide of our cities into two populations.
Could you repeat the question? No, the question is, since the auto mobility proportion is so large, and that people wanted that, and that's the evolution. So how are we going to do things differently now in the face of that? I was frankly very shocked to learn in Peter's book, Fighting Traffic, the degree to which the automotive industry lobbied the United States government to switch policies, training, everything to favor automobiles. It is amazing. You really should read that book. They started the auto. Well, they did that, and
But keep in mind, at that time in 1920s, there was no federal gas tax, there was no federal transportation funding. They set engineering standards. They had zero influence over how cities spent their money on either trolleys or streets. Zero. All
well,
they do was talk. They didn't provide any funding.
when I was a young engineer, I was in admiration of a fellow named Jack Barr that I worked for. And he had been to the Yale Traffic School. Really top notch. The Yale Traffic School was funded by Studebaker. They paid for the professor that was up there teaching automotive policies that the United States should do. Studebaker paid his salary. Now, is that free of any kind of, influence? No. They started all the national traffic safety councils, all of that stuff. Anyway, it's very illuminating. It had a great deal to do with corporate policy. They would say, they call themselves motordom. Motordom, that's their own name, they call themselves. And there were more of them back then. There were probably 50 or so instead of the 3 or 4 we have now. But they really went whole hog. They said, we need more dance floor space in the downtowns. So let's take off this angled parking and let's knock these buildings down. And their main sin, if you want to put it that way, is to try to convince everybody that speed in automobiles is safe in a city. And that is absolutely not true. So check it out. It was... Well, anyway, it's a long story there. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I was very happy to hear you say that this automated driving is actually going to increase trips, not decrease it. That would suggest your ride sharing will even increase trips more because there's new trips going from one passenger to the next. But with that increase in driving, with the fact that it's not really practical to take many trips on foot, given that mass transit gets caught in traffic congestion as well, given that not many trips are really going to be done by bike. So this 90% of trips, it's closer to 100 really, percent of trips being by driving. Isn't it really pernicious for this general philosophy that, and I haven't heard you say it, but I heard Andrew said it, you endorsed him and others, that we really ought to just drop the reins on traffic density and intensity, allow more and more development, not worry too much about road improvements other than grid connections, and embrace traffic congestion. With that increase in automotive transportation, that need that people have to really get from point A to point B, isn't it just wrong-headed to embrace congestion and embrace massive increases? The 440 FAR ratio you put up there. And isn't this why development interests such as the Chamber of Commerce really embrace this philosophy?
Okay, the question was, shouldn't we focus on the major automotive mobility paradigm that we have now and not expect too much from the other modes? Fair enough?
Well, yes, pedestrian modalities enhance other opportunities to get around, but not have this contempt for vehicular traffic that drives us to not care too much about the traffic impacts of development, not care too much about road improvements. Andrew said no more turn lanes. Should have never had any turn lanes.
No,
people's quality of
no, let me respond. We can continue down the path of automotive dominance, thinking that that's what most Americans want. And the problem is, it's so difficult to imagine anything else. But if you go to places that have been proactively built to support walkability and bikeability and effective transit, they are like, the difference is night and day. The property values in the walkable places are skyrocketing over what happens in the suburbs. The suburbs have created a kind of a town and country, feeling of, oh, this is really good. I'm in the country, but the town's right next to me. But you're commuting 10 miles, 15, 20 miles. You're ending up like this guy on the couch. They're unhealthy for us. They are unhealthy for the environment. And they are a poor business model going forward. So.
You're going to walk 10 miles? You're going to walk a little.
No, let's not.
Sarasota,
Let's not.
80 years old,
No, come on.
is going to walk half a mile?
No, here's the deal. You go, you take the longer distance vehicle when you need to go a longer distance. But what's really killing us is even the short trips, you fire up the car and go the short distance. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just, going back to what you said, and, this is one of the things areas that concerns me. I think this whole thing of the mixed development is great, but I can tell you that most of the people I know can't afford to live there, and I have a good job with a good salary. My son, who's a millennial, certainly can't afford to live there, so he's
Yep.
gonna live somewhere else and drive in because that's where he has to work. How
So-
do you, it's all great to say, we're gonna create these mixed-use communities, and we're gonna walk, and people aren't gonna need their cars for.
Yeah. Okay. So you're
That's not realistic.
you're concerned about the affordability of these mixed-use places. Today, so much of America's built environment is suburban and totally auto-dominant. And so few of these walkable communities exist that they are like platinum. They are so rare that people are beating the doors down to get in there and buy some, and that drives the price up. If the coast of Florida from Pensacola all the way around to Tampa had 925 seaside communities, then you would not have those high prices in seaside.
The fact of the matter is that coastal communities are very expensive and not affordable for the average person, and that's always, not only here, I've seen it when I lived in California, I lived in the Northeast. Coastal communities tend to have a higher.
Okay, let's move away from the coastal versus the non. There are walkable places in the interior, in Gainesville, Florida. No coast around Gainesville. And they are very, very expensive because there are too few of them. You will see, I can guarantee you this, that when more of these form-based codes are in place and more knowledge is spread and our environment begins to even slide even more than it has already, that you will see the prices even out on a same city basis between the walkable communities and the others. Well, I don't know if they'll even out because the non-walkable places are going to continue to degrade in value. I was at a charrette in South Carolina, and this woman was worried. She had a suburban house out there. We were going to put a walkable community, and she said, well, what should I do? And I said, ma'am, if I were you, I would try as hard as I can to buy a lot in this walkable community because your suburban housing value is going to plummet over the years. It's a long-term bad investment. They are kicking people out of San Francisco to build new buildings, and they're ejected into the suburbs where it's cheaper to live now.
And you gotta commute 3 hours to get to work.
That's a problem. That's a problem. But so it's really a lot of it is supply and demand. Supply
Ladies
and
and
demand.
gentlemen, Rick Hall. Thank you, Rick. For those of you who've been here the last 5 weeks, we've got a 2-week space here for our final wrap-up. We're going to have some written materials for you, some handouts for you next time that's going to compile a lot of what we've been over the last few weeks. So join us November 7th. That is a Tuesday night, and we will do our wrap-up session. Thank you very much.